The Australian dream. The Australian dream is rooted in racism. It is the very foundation of the dream. It is there at the birth of the nation. It is there in terra nullius.
This is Stan Grant, an activist journalist loved by the left. His racist speeches about the evils of Australia, specifically white Australia, gain the accolades of the media class. He attacks Western culture and decries the historical victimhood of whom he deems his people, despite his obvious European heritage. Today, I want to highlight a speech he gave in early 2016. His speeches are all about the same, so you respond to one, you respond to them all. And in case you were wondering, terra nullius isn't racist. It's not even imperialistic. At worst, it's a doctrine that's slightly misled, but not entirely wrong. Besides, without it, there would be no Australia, there would be no English settlement, and most of all, there would be no Stan Grant.
We turned to face ourselves, and it happened in that place most sacred to us, the sporting field. Adam Goodes, an Indigenous footballer, one of the greatest players of his generation, was abused and retreated until he retreated himself from the field. Booed. Booed by people in their thousands.
Oh no, you mean a professional athlete got booed? I'm sure that's never happened in the history of sport.
Organization credit.
Durant.
For those who've never heard of Adam Goodes, he's a former Australian rules football player. He started his AFL career in 1999 and retired in 2015 when he was 35, meaning by objective standards, he had a very long career. He won the AFL's Best and Fairest award and is a champion of the game. So it's interesting that Stan says Goodes was booed until he retreated from the field, given he retired at 35 after 16 years at the top. Most established players barely last until 32, and the average career is just 3 years. But yeah, it was the booing that sent this old age veteran packing Stan. But why was Adam Goodes booed, I hear you ask? Well, maybe it has something to do with the fact that after winning the Australian of the Year, he used his awards speech to call Australians racist and to push racial identity politics. Maybe it has something to do with getting a 13-year-old spectator kicked out of a stadium for calling him an ape, something I've been called a million times, and as the girl explained, was because he's hairy, not because of his race. Maybe it has something to do with calling Australia Day Invasion Day. Australia Day is the day we celebrate the first fleet arriving on this continent. It's the day we began building this great nation we Australians are lucky enough to now live in. It is a day to be revered and remembered fondly because if it wasn't for the first fleet, Australia could well have ended up French. If you're going to use your platform as an elite athlete to make hard-left political statements, then don't complain when you get booed. American football players get booed when they kneel for the anthem, and so will you. Even pretty boy ballet dancer Cristiano Ronaldo gets booed sometimes, but that's only because he's a giant Nancy.
Así mira el público. Muy bien. Así mira el público después de los pitos.
Instead of letting high-status grown adult Adam Goodes take responsibility for his actions, Stan Grant uses the booing to push his racist, anti-West activism onto the world.
This wasn't about sport. This was about our shared history and our failure to reconcile it. Some sought to deny this, others to excuse it, but when thousands of voices booed Adam Goodes, my people knew that sound.
He is right about one thing. It had nothing to do with sport. What Stan fails to grasp is that Adam Goodes' politics and actions were deeply offensive to many Australians. Goodes' Australia Day speech, where he decried Australia as racist, was extremely divisive. calling out a 13-year-old girl after falsely assuming she made a racist comment was cruel, and calling Australia Day Invasion Day was just plain idiotic. Australians have every right to boo Goods for calling us racist. Grant refuses to acknowledge the actions and words of this elite athlete, instead says, "White people are just racist, so there." The funniest thing about it, he's roughly half white. So by calling Aboriginals my people, what he really means are people that share only half his ancestry. The half that isn't the European half, of course. Because everyone knows white Europeans are all racists.
Tethered to each other, black and white, the sons of daughters of settlers, the more recent migrants, refugees looking for a haven, and my people with tens of thousands of years of tradition. I have to accept you, we are so few, and we have no choice.
Well, all hail our great masters who just have to accept us. I fear we are not worthy of the great holy people, the acceptors of all things that must be accepted. This poor little victim just has to accept us because we don't belong here apparently. It's fair to say that being born here isn't enough, but what else do we need to do? Let's see. I speak the national language with the national accent. I live Australian culture. I respect those who died so that we could live and speak freely. I believe in the absolute right to free speech, equal opportunity, and constitutionally representative democracy. I believe in equality under the law for all citizens, and I'm against the use of state power to punish some and elevate others. I was born here. My parents were born here. My grandparents were born here. And all but one of my great-grandparents were born here. Most of all, I love my country, I love my cricket, and I love my footy. Count the Hawks. But apparently, I don't belong here because I don't have Aboriginal heritage. Damn my impure white male genes. Leftists like Stan Grant would label Australians immoral and intolerant when we are one of the most moral and tolerant nations on earth. Also, do Europeans not have tens of thousands of years of culture? Nah. Europeans don't have any culture at all, Matty.
The great American playwright Eugene O'Neill said, "There is no present or future, there is just the past, happening over again and again."
Kinda like your speeches, hey?
You're living in the past, man.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed! Bloody
Racist!
What a giveaway.
For so many of my people, Aboriginal people, this is true. There is a deep wound that comes from the time of dispossession, scarred by the generations of injustice and suffering that have followed.
More of that victim complex, more, woe is us, life is so hard and it's your fault, now feel guilty you evil white people. Newsflash for Stan, life is stress, discomfort and unease. Life is suffering. This is the first noble truth of the Buddha. The idea that Aborigines have a monopoly on suffering and it's all Europeans' fault is beyond ignorant and an insult to ordinary Australians. I've had ancestors die in war, famine, had their land stolen, tortured to death, and worse. How do I know this? Because we've all got ancestors who have suffered in these ways. This is the reality of human existence. The question isn't whether or not people suffer, it's how do we reduce it now? A question that's been pondered by countless men far smarter than most. When you live in the past and pretend like you are nothing but a victim of history, you do Aboriginal people a major disservice. You paint them as nothing but victims who can't help themselves, and in doing so you rob them of the chance at a meaningful life. There are few greater sins.
And this wound sits at the heart of the malaise that grips Indigenous Australia today. It is there in our life expectancy 10 years shorter than other Australians. It is there in statistics that tell us we are not 3% of the population, but a quarter of our prisons.
Interesting that he brings up life expectancy of his people and points out that it's 10 years shorter than the rest of the population. The data actually reflects this statement. Australian life expectancy currently sits at 82.5 years and Aboriginals can expect to live about 72 years. I wonder if Stan realises that Aboriginals before European settlement lived a brutally violent and tribal hunter-gatherer life. From the Quadrant article, The Long History of Aboriginal Violence, Part 2. Link in the description. Violence levels are evidence for thousands of years into prehistory. Paleopathologist Stephen Webb in 1995 published his analysis of 4,500 individual bones from mainland Australia going back 50,000 years. Priceless bone collections at the time were being officially handed over to Aboriginal communities for reburial, which stopped follow-up studies. Webb found highly disproportionate rates of injuries and fractures to women's skulls, with the injuries suggesting deliberate attack and often attacks from behind, perhaps in domestic squabbles. In the tropics, for example, female head injury frequency was about 20 to 33% versus 6.5 to 26% for males. I wonder if Stan realises that life expectancy for hunter-gatherers is between 30 and 40 years, meaning European settlement has actually doubled Aboriginal lifespans. But I guess 50,000 years of violent conflict is nothing compared to the evils of white people bringing peace, prosperity, health, and doubling your life expectancy. Those evil white racists. As for the prison rates, has he considered that maybe it's because Aboriginal people commit more crime? Oh wait, they're always the victim. Never mind.
My family, like so many Indigenous families, is shackled to its past. We are told to let it go, but it is a living thing.
You're living in the past, man.
What wounds are those? The increased life expectancy? The safe prosperity and ease of modern life? The literally billions of dollars a year stolen from taxpayers and handed to Aborigines just because of their race? You don't seem to be having any trouble at all while you signal your piety in a European business suit. Maybe if you weren't busy hectoring white Australians about the perceived crimes of those long dead, you might actually find a genuine solution to the problems many Aboriginals are genuinely facing today. Problems like rampant, alcohol-fueled sexual and physical abuse, even of children, directly caused by dependence on state welfare and being locked out of the job market by the minimum wage. Not to mention the refusal to remove abused children from abusive homes for fear of creating another mythical stolen generation. I guess it's just easier to attack others and make dogmatic appeals to emotions than to actually have a good idea and implement it with results.
It is there in numbers that show Indigenous men between 25 and 30 are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than any other Australian.
This is an absolute tragedy, and evidence of nothing but the failure of left-wing fools like Stan Grant, who care more about pushing politics, specifically identity politics, than actually solving real-world issues. How regretful that people like him have influenced policy for so long, implementing programs that rip apart not just Aboriginal communities, but all communities. Policies of forceful wealth redistribution over private and direct charity. Policies of cowards who would leave children to live in an abusive hell for fear of being labelled racist. This tragedy made worse by the sophists who would point the finger at others and cry racist instead of looking in the mirror. I want to point out another tragedy that doesn't get spoken about much at all. Australian men are 3.3 times more likely to commit suicide than Australian women. But I guess that's white males killing themselves, so who cares, right? Just ask Google.
You're a white male! You're a white man!
Stan Grant pushes a black armband version of history and identity politics that nobody outside the hard left genuinely supports. He tells the leftist media exactly what they want to hear, that Aboriginals are always the victims and Europeans are evil conquerors who have brought nothing but misery to poor victim Aborigines. He's a European man who discards half his heritage, most likely because it's politically and financially convenient to do so. He offers no solutions to the very real problems that many Aboriginal people still face, instead preferring a strategy of hand-wringing and the perpetuation of white guilt. There are genuine problems within Aboriginal communities that need to be solved, but this can only happen on an individual basis. Only individuals can find meaning in their own lives in order to reduce their own suffering. This is the whole point of Western civilization, a civilization that has created the most prosperous, safe, free, and tolerant societies in history. If Stan really wanted to fix the genuine suffering of those he deems his people, he wouldn't be labelling them as victims and demanding all white people repent for the sins of our great-great-great-great-grandparents. He'd be calling for an end to the welfare handed out simply for having a little bit of Aboriginal ancestry. He'd be calling for an end to the constant intervention of the state into the economy that does nothing but keep Aborigines poor. He'd be working within his communities to encourage individuality, hard work, and for Aboriginal Australians to find true meaning in their lives. Most of all, he'd be calling for abused Aboriginal children to be removed from their families and placed in foster care where they can be safe and free from rampant abuse. He won't do what is actually needed because he's a hypocrite and an opportunist. He's nothing but a sophist using a talent for producing emotional reactions that mask his complete lack of insight and willingness to fix real problems. He's living in the past while placing the sins of long-dead Australians onto those who are guilty of nothing but being born. He was spot on about one thing, though.
I spent half my adult life away from Australia. I felt liberated from the chains of this history. No longer did I meet people across this chasm of race.
Your instinct to leave was a good one. Please do us all a favour and listen to it. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget, I do have a Twitter, Minds and Gab account. Links are all in the description. Go check them out. Really hope you enjoyed my content today. Go check out all my other stuff if you haven't seen it already. Click the subscribe button and the bell. Leave a like, comment, and hopefully I'll see you around.